and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in today's program, The Atlantic magazine reveals fresh details about the chat group on the messaging app Signal, which top US officials mistakenly shared with a journalist. Well, the new details show plans of an imminent attack on Yemen being discussed. Following talks brokered by the United States, Russia and Ukraine agree to halt military strikes in the Black Sea and on energy sites. And Washington says it has scaled back the visit to Greenland by a US delegation. The previous plan sparked criticism and was deemed disrespectful by one Greenlandic MP. Hello and welcome to the program. The Atlantic magazine has just published the full exchange of messages between senior White House officials. Well, those officials inadvertently included the Atlantic editor-in-chief, Jeffrey Goldberg, in their discussion on the messaging app Signal. Well, they did so as they discussed planned US strikes on Yemen. Well, initially, the Atlantic did not publish the full details of what it said was highly classified information. However, they appear to have changed their mind after the White House denied that any classified information had been discussed in that chat. Well, speaking to Fox News, the US National Security Advisor Mike Waltz accepted responsibility for creating the Signal group. But as he did so, he continued to discredit Goldberg and his reputation as a journalist.
Look, I take full responsibility. I built the group. My job is to make sure everything's coordinated. It's embarrassing, yes. We're going to get to the bottom of it, but I can tell you for 100%, I don't know this guy. I know him by his horrible reputation, and he really is the bottom scum of journalists. And I know him in the sense that he hates the president, but I don't text him. He wasn't on my phone.
And that was the US National Security Advisor. Well, President Trump is standing by his security advisor, Matt Waltz, saying that he shouldn't have to apologize and referring to Goldberg as, quote, a sleazebag.
So this was not classified. Now, if it's classified information, it's probably a little bit different. But I always say you have to learn from every experience. I think it was very unfair the way they attacked Michael. He's a good person. The person that was on just happens to be a sleazebag, so maybe that's just coincidence. I don't know.
President Trump speaking there. Well, there's been a further fallout from European countries to these intel leaks. This, of course, in response to that Signal group chat. Well, on the programme, Good Morning Britain, the British Defence Secretary John Healey was asked for his reaction and asked whether the US could be trusted with intel and classified information. This is what he had to say.
In terms of our relationship, intelligence and defence and security with the US, it's the deepest, it remains the closest of any ally. What it says to us in the UK is a reminder that we need to be, as we are, hot on our own security, on our communications.
The British Defence Secretary speaking there. Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Sir Mark Lyall Grant, who's the former UK National Security Advisor and a former UK Ambassador to the United Nations, who joins us from London. Great to have you with us once again, Sir Mark. We're also joined by Matt Terrill, former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio's 2016 presidential campaign, now a managing partner of Firehouse Strategies. He joins us from Washington. Great to have you both with us. Let me start with you, Matt. I'd like to ask you, the Trump administration trying to downplay and contain the fallout from the Signal scandal. Now, new revelations have come forward from the Atlantic. How is the Trump administration doing in their attempts to contain this scandal?
Well, I think they're doing a fine job. I mean, look, first and foremost, we saw National Security Advisor Mike Waltz lead on this by owning this. You saw that last night in an interview he did where he owned the situation, took leadership over it. So that's, obviously the right course to take as an administration. Beyond that, according to the administration, they're going to be looking into this. And obviously the goal is to ensure that this doesn't happen again. Obviously it was a mistake, no question about it. But I think in the eyes of many Americans, what wasn't a mistake was the attacks that President Trump launched against the Houthis. Those were incredibly successful attacks. I mean, look, they took out Houthi leadership, they took out, Houthi missile sites, they took out Houthi headquarters. So a very successful attack, and it's all warranted. I mean, look, the Houthis have blocked and been, frankly, very negative. It had a very negative effect on global trade, very negative effect on the U.S. economic security. On top of that, the Houthis attacked the U.S. Navy over 170 times. They've attacked commercial ships over 140 times. So, look, I think the majority of Americans agree that those attacks were warranted. They're the right course to take. They backed the Trump administration on it. I think the vast majority of Americans are more focused on the fact that those were successful attacks and appreciate the administration doing that. And frankly, the rest of this, the administration will work out, and I'm confident it'll never happen again.
Okay, let's turn to Sir Mark, and we'll pick up on some of the points you made in just a moment. But Sir Mark, just going back to the way this has been handled, and now in light of these latest revelations from the Atlantic, I mean, how do the new revelations change things as far as how the White House and the Trump administration has been responding to all of this?
Well, I think it's important to say sort of two things at the outset. One, that in the modern era, this sort of informal communication between political leaders on social media, different messaging apps, has become fairly frequent. What is unusual about this episode is the classification level of the information being shared. The other thing it's important to say at the outset is that clearly no serious damage was done to the actual operational success of the military mission against the Houthis. But having said that, it's clearly a very embarrassing episode, as Mr. Terrill says, and there could have been potentially a security risk because what has been shared in this group, this signal group, is exact timings of attacks, types of aircraft being attacked several hours in advance of some of those attacks. And had that leaked to the Houthis, it might have jeopardized the success of the operation and indeed potentially jeopardized the lives of American pilots and sailors. That didn't happen, as I say, but it's obviously a risk. I think the other two concerns that certainly Europeans would have, one is it does show a certain sort of amateurish approach, the fact that this journalist was added to the group and no one seemed to notice. And secondly, of course, you have these offhand, rather contemptuous comments about Europe being exchanged by senior officials in the Trump administration, which sort of reaffirms in European eyes the fact that President Trump and his team don't really appreciate their allies all that much.
Indeed, they were described as freeloaders and pathetic. But just going back to you, Matt, I mean, in terms of the substance of what was discussed there, I mean, how would you classify it? Would you call the sort of exchange, especially the latest revelations we've seen from the Atlantic, I mean, is this sensitive information? Is this top secret information? Is this classified information? Because the Trump administration earlier said none of it was classified. But do you think perhaps they're having a rethink?
Well, look, I think the Trump administration, to your point, has been clear that this was not classified information. That's what they're saying. And I'm going to believe what the administration is putting out there, obviously, in terms of what they're stating on this information. And look, they're going to do, obviously, the course of reviewing this and figuring out exactly what happened here. And obviously, the goal is to ensure it never happens again. You know, I would be assuming that the appropriate reviews will be done. I'm confident that will happen. And of course, you have confidence it'll never happen again, but never say never to anything. The bottom line is there's always situations that can occur. The goal is to learn from these things, to figure out, okay, what went wrong, and then what can we do going forward as an organization, in this case, as a White House, as a national security community, to ensure this does not happen again. I think at the end of the day, though, you know, the good news here is that this wasn't classified in the eyes of the administration. The other aspect here is you got to be realistic about the world we live in. You know, it may not be always a situation where you can meet in person. So you're going to have the ability to use technology and other applications. We'll see what the administration does here going forward. Obviously, the goal is to learn from this and then proceed forward and hopefully, of course, not have this happen again.
Yeah, but the administration was saying this wasn't classified until the Atlantic released these latest excerpts of the conversation, which perhaps prove that the administration was wrong in that assessment. I mean, talking about attack sequencing, weaponry, targets, I mean, if that isn't classified, what is?
I'll leave it to the administration to decide what they view as classified or not. Let them speak for themselves on that. I can just tell you, I think, look, the reality is I think the vast majority of Americans, people around the world watching this, recognize that in administrations, things happen. Obviously, something happened here that should not have happened. And again, it's clear that the administration is working to get to the bottom of it. And it's important to figure out exactly what went wrong here. Let's let the review process take its course and see what comes out of that. But beyond that, again, go back to, we got to be realistic about the world we live in. The reality is technology is not always perfect. Human beings are not always perfect. The goal here should be to learn from this and then proceed forward. But again, I go back to that these attacks were successful. The attacks were not impacted. And these were effective attacks. And I think the vast majority of Americans and people around the world watching it appreciate the administration delivering those attacks on what the administration deemed as a terrorist organization.
Okay, let me turn back to Sir Mark. When you hear officials of this level of seniority in the US administration talking about weaponry, imminent attacks, targets, attack sequencing, I mean, what word would you use to describe it? Would you say it's classified or perhaps something that isn't such a big deal?
Well, by any reasonable definition, Tom, obviously that is classified at the time the communications were sent. Maybe it's been declassified since, and we'll no doubt find out about that. I wouldn't put it in the sort of top secret category, but nonetheless, one can have to say that this is not the sort of information that you would broadcast in advance of a military operation. So clearly, in that sense, it is classified. To me, I'm just a bit surprised that it's not clear that everyone even officially on the group, needed to know in real time exactly what was happening. Normally, that would either be done through the White House Situation Room or something, like we saw when the attack on Osama bin Laden was happening or something like that. You'd have thought that it wasn't necessary for all the people who were there to be kept abreast in live time of exactly what was happening.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you, in your capacity, Sir Mark, as having been the UK National Security Advisor, I mean, I'd like to get your opinion on Signal as an application. Is it one that people in the intelligence community, as far as you are aware, regard as being trustworthy, a safe sort of an application, bearing in mind that an entire handset can be compromised, and therefore, even if the app is secure, the phone might not be. What do you think about the use of Signal?
Well, Signal is a lot more a secure messaging app than, say, text messages or WhatsApp or something like that, because it does use end-to-end encryption. So it does have quite a lot of protection, and that's why it's become quite a popular messaging app for officials to use. But that does not mean that it's not vulnerable to hostile attack from more sophisticated opponents. I mean, the Russians, the Chinese, others, of course, would be able to crack into these sorts of messages. Now, we don't know whether they did or they didn't, and it wouldn't have made much difference if they had, given that the attack was on Yemen. But nonetheless, it is more secure than some, but it is not completely secure. And I think, as I understand it, the Department of Defense themselves quite recently said that classified information should not be communicated through the Signal app.
Okay, and Matt, one other aspect about Signal that, might be a cause for concern. Love to get your thoughts on this. I mean, this particular chat was set up to erase the conversation after a matter of days. I don't know how many days, but it was set up. It can be adjusted on Signal in such a way that the messages disappear, and yet that violates rules about the retention of government records. So I'm just wondering whether you think there has been, where there is a criminal dimension to all of this.
Well, look, I'll let the administration speak for themselves and all that. I'm confident the administration believes that there is not any criminal aspect to this. I'm confident the administration believes that they did all the right things here in terms of how they were conducting communication here, and even pointing to the ways that previous administrations, the last administration, used applications, the Biden administration used applications for communicating. So, look, I think the administration feels confident and clear that they absolutely followed all the right protocol here on this. Obviously, there was a situation that occurred here where the wrong individual got into the application. That was not obviously something that should have happened in terms of the process on these things. And of course, they got to do their course of reviewing that. But I think the administration feels as though that we're living in a world where applications are going to be used. We're in a different world than we were decades ago. It is not always possible to have people in a room discussing things. There are new applications that are now being utilized. Obviously, these have to be applications that are secure. But technology is not always 100% secure, as we all know. And that's in, people in their personal lives and their work lives see that. And of course, here we saw a situation where obviously the wrong individual who should not have been in there got in. That needs to be reviewed. Again, I'm confident they will do the right course here and take the right approach to review this and not have this happen again. But again, there needs to be a recognition here that we are living in a different environment. And the truth is, different applications can be used. And I think the importance here is ensuring that there's secure use of it. But again, we'll have to see how this unfolds with the investigation, if you will, here, or the review by the administration. They're on top of it. They're doing all the things, in my view, they need to be doing in order to reviewing this and making sure that this is a process going forward here that's obviously improved and that this does not happen again.
It's quite interesting that there's been quite so much criticism of the journalist in question, Goldberg. He was dismissed as being a sleazebag by President Trump. We heard a clip before we crossed to you of the US National Security Advisor describing him as, berating his journalistic credentials, shall we say. And yet, they're quite lucky, aren't they, that they stumbled upon a journalist like Goldberg, because he showed some integrity, didn't he, by coming forward. I mean, he could have perhaps stuck around in that group and learned an awful lot more and revealed that to the wider world. I mean, what are your thoughts about that, Sir Mark?
Well, I don't really have any sort of specific comments on Jeffrey Goldberg. I don't know him at all, but I think it's probably not sensible in the longer term for the administration to shoot the messenger. As you say, it was fortunate in some ways that he acted as honourably as he did.
What do you think, Matt? Do you think he acted honourably?
Well, obviously, the right thing to do is not to go out there and release things that could be, things that you don't want out there ahead of an attack, if you will. So, look, I think he did the right thing there. But this is not somebody in the eyes of the administration who's been obviously friendly to them. Obviously, you're seeing the administration have their views and how he has conducted himself here and how he's conducted himself in the past with stories and things of that nature. But obviously, when a journalist comes into information, in my view at least, when a journalist comes into information ahead of an attack that they obviously should not have, obviously the right move there is to not, if you will, go out there and put it to print. Obviously, this journalist now is telling his side of the story. And look, everyone's got to, obviously recognize that this was somebody who should not have been on this application, should not have been part of this. The journalists recognize that. The administration recognizes that. I think the goal here, obviously, from the administration's side, is, as they are rightfully doing, is do the proper investigation, look into it, work as a team to make sure it doesn't happen again, and push forward. And again, I go back to National Security Advisor Waltz has already been taking ownership on this, taking leadership on it. I think this is the right course here in terms of the administration's approach. Okay.
Do you think heads should roll?
No, look, I think the president's been clear he's going to be standing by his team. I mean, I don't think the president's going to be, President Trump has every right to do what he sees fit. I do not believe he's going to be terminating anybody over this. I think they're going to do a review over this. Obviously, up to the president to decide what he does or does not do. That is his decision. But I think he was clear in that meeting that, from what I read out of that meeting that he had yesterday, that he is backing his national security team. I think he has full confidence and trust in his national security team. Obviously, this is something that occurred that shouldn't have happened, but that happens in administrations. Mistakes are made, things happen. And the bottom line here is the administration has been clear that they do want to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. Let's see what they say in terms of the full review on this. Let's let the full review take its course. I think President Trump's going to stand by his team. I think you saw, obviously, as I read what he was doing yesterday in that meeting, doing exactly that. And I think he's going to be standing by his national security team, his entire administration. And that's what I think he's going to do going forward here.
So, Mark, one of the revelations we were talking about earlier on was, this idea that European nations are freeloading off the United States, that they're pathetic. I mean, some might say, hard truths, and perhaps something that they need to hear. Don't know what you think. But I also wonder whether you think this is perhaps going to prompt a rethink by some of America's allies about how and what it shares in terms of intel. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't think so. Look, the UK and the US, as the Defence Secretary said, are the closest sort of allies in intelligence terms and indeed in wider defence and security terms. And I can't see any reason why Britain should withhold intelligence from America because of this lapse. So, no, I don't think there'll be any long-term implications in terms of the intelligence relationship between the two countries at all.
And what do you make of the comments themselves about Europe and what are essentially historic allies of the United States?
The reaffirmation rather than new information of what we've heard publicly. It's not that they're saying something different in public and private. Senior people in the administration, including President Trump himself, of course, have said very much that they think that the Europeans have had a free ride on security. And of course, they're right to some extent. More so for some countries than others, of course. But in general, it is right that Europeans should be galvanized into spending more of their money and effort on securing their defense. It's obviously rather brutal to hear about it in this slightly casual way on a Signal chat group, but nonetheless, I don't think that message in private is much different from the message that all European leaders are getting in public from the Trump administration.
Just turning back to you, Matt, I mean, this is obviously just one secret group on Signal. It's the only one that's known about in the wider world involving senior officials. Do you think there's a chance there are others out there and that there's scope for other breaches?
Well, look, we'll have to see what occurs with other applications. I mean, look, the truth is technology is not perfect. Human beings are not perfect. So who knows what is out there. But I can tell you, I think this administration feels good about the fact that they're following the protocol. I think this administration feels confident that they're doing all the right things in terms of utilizing applications, national security interests, the protection of national security dynamics. And look, obviously, you had a situation here that shouldn't have occurred. Let's let them do what they need to do as an administration to get to the bottom of it. But look, this comes down to confidence and trust. And I think President Trump has full confidence and trust in the team he has on the field. This is a different administration than Trump 1.0, where I don't think he had trust and respect, frankly, of all the people that were in his administration, Trump 1.0. This is a different administration. I think he feels very good about the people around him, whether it's on domestic policy or national security or foreign policy. I think his entire team is a team that he has a great deal of trust and confidence in. And I think at the end of the day, that's what matters. If you trust the people who are in your team, on your team, in your administration, that goes a long way in terms of ensuring all the right protocols are being followed. Again, this was a one-off here. Things happen in administrations. Administrations have things that occur. The bottom line is how you move forward. How do you react and how do you move forward? I think National Security Advisor Waltz did the right thing by taking leadership on this, owning it. I think the administration is doing the right thing by trying to get to the bottom of it and doing their part to get the true answers on what occurred.
And given how damaging that private server issue was for Hillary Clinton when she was running for president almost a decade ago, I mean, there's huge scope, isn't there, here for this to be politicized and used at a later date by President Trump's opponents. I mean, do you think this is comparable in any way in terms of a lapse of judgment and a lapse of security norms and protocols? Matt?
No, I do not. I think many would argue who reviewed and looked at what Secretary Clinton did, extremely different to what occurred with this application. I mean, look, it is clear that the individuals on that application from the Trump administration, at least according to National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, we're not aware that this individual is on the application. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz made it clear he didn't even know who this journalist was. He has indicated he never met this journalist. So it's not as if the individuals from the Trump administration on that call were intentionally inviting this person on the call or intentionally trying to do the wrong thing here. This was obviously an error, a mistake. Let's let the administration get to the bottom of exactly how that happened. In the case of Secretary Clinton, I think the reality is many would argue that she knew exactly what the policy was in terms of email. She not, many would argue, intentionally followed that policy in terms of what should have been done. And obviously, that was a major error by Secretary Clinton. It's something that many Americans, I think, had concerns with. I actually happen to believe it's one of the reasons why she lost the 2016 presidential election. So look, I think these are very different situations. In my view, no question about it. Let's let the administration do what they need to do to get to the bottom of what occurred here. Going forward is what truly matters to make sure that this doesn't happen again in terms of this application. And then, the reality is I think the American people are looking at results. They're looking at what's happening with the recent dynamics around Ukraine and Russia and President Trump trying to get that war to an end. Obviously, they're looking at what happened with the Houthis attacks, with I think the American people. I believe the American people have full confidence President Trump did the right thing there. I think the American people recognize that President Trump is trying to get things done. And that's where the American people's focus is more, I think, focused on. What is President Trump doing in office? You're seeing, prices go down. Price of eggs are going down. Price of gas is going down. You're seeing inflation collectively go down. On the foreign policy front, you're seeing, I think, the president have big wins there, and at least moving in the right direction in terms of ending wars, ending conflicts. That's what the American people, I think, really want out of President Trump. That's where I think their focus will lie here.
Okay, Matt, you had the first word in this discussion. Let's give the last word to Sir Mark. Anything you'd like to pick up on there, and do you see any parallels between this signal gate, as some are calling it, and Hillary Clinton's private server scandal?
I don't think so, really. I think they're two separate events, and I don't want to get into domestic politics in the United States. But I would say that I mean, one thing that I agree with Mr. Terrill when he says that this is a more stable administration than Trump's first administration. By this time, 8 years ago, I had lost my American opposite number as National Security Advisor, General Mike Flynn. He'd already been sacked by the end of March. So clearly there are people around President Trump who he trusts and have faith, and whom have faith in him. And that does make for a more stable administration.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. You've had the last word, Sir Mark, Lyall, Grant. Thank you very much indeed to you, and thank you as well to Matt Terrill. Thank you to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, Ukraine and Russia have agreed to pause military strikes in the Black Sea and against each other's energy infrastructure. But today, Russia said that some Western sanctions must be lifted before it begins a maritime ceasefire with Ukraine. Well, those demands include revoking sanctions on a Russian state agricultural bank and restoring the firm's access to the SWIFT international payment system. Meanwhile, Ukraine says that Russia launched more than 100 drones overnight, and the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says that those drone strikes indicate that Russia is not serious about pursuing real peace. Well, on the streets of Kyiv, residents said they have little faith that the Ukraine-Russia ceasefire deals on energy infrastructure and the Black Sea are going to hold. One resident said that negotiations simply give Russia room to regroup and launch more attacks.
No, I think that the Putin is a liar, a big liar. I think it's the biggest liar in the world.
They make it look like they're interested in negotiations and peace because they are in a corner and they need the world to think so, so that they have some room to prepare, to regroup, to plan the new attacks.
Word there on the streets of the Ukrainian capital. Well, let's get some more analysis. We can speak to PJ Crowley, former US Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama, who joins us from Virginia in the United States. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We've got two ceasefire agreements here that have been agreed by the United States after those talks in Saudi Arabia. One maritime in the Black Sea, the other relating now to energy targets. How significant are these developments?
Well, I think they're potentially quite significant. Energy is a very important element to Ukrainian sovereignty, and the Black Sea is important to the economies of both Ukraine, and Russia. Of course, the devil is in the details, and it's not surprising that Vladimir Putin, who has been just sitting on the sidelines watching Donald Trump give him this, that, and the other thing, is saying, Donald, I'd like to do this for you, but I need one more thing in terms of sanctions. So far, this is a one-way process where Russia is getting a lot and has not yet been asked to give anything significant in return.
I was going to ask you, several concessions to the Russians. Anything in return was going to be one of my next questions, but it sounds like the answer is no.
Well, when you're talking about the Black Sea, for example, over the past 3 years, Ukraine, which has no significant navy to speak of, has still been able to inflict significant damage on Russia's Black Sea fleet. So this is profoundly in Russia's interest, to observe a ceasefire, but given the current dynamic, Putin is just trying to get as much as he can, before agreeing to the ceasefire.
Someone we speak to quite often on this channel is a former Putin spokesperson, Sergei Markov, who still seems to very much toe the Kremlin line. He said, from a military angle, the Black Sea initiative looks pointless. There are no battles there, he says. He also says that President Trump needs a success story, and this is a great way of showing that there are some peace initiatives. Do you think he's got a point, and that, for instance, that Black Sea initiative is merely window dressing?
I think he's discounting how much Russia has been impacted by what Ukraine has been able to do, in the Black Sea, without having a real navy to speak of. He's absolutely right that that the dilemma here, as we continue through this process, is it appears that Donald Trump wants an agreement more than the warring parties do, and that's not exactly a winning negotiating strategy.
Yeah, and President Zelensky is saying that the US and the West should actually be increasing and stepping up the sanctions against Russia, not easing them. I mean, in your opinion, and I think I know the answer to this, I mean, is now the time to be easing sanctions and making these kind of concessions to the Russians?
Well, certainly it is the time to try to achieve a ceasefire and then begin a negotiation, to end the conflict. But when you reach a ceasefire and then potentially a long-term agreement, it has to be something that is sustainable, and it has to be something that Ukraine can live with. And this is the tension that we've seen since Trump returned to the White House. The pressure has been on Ukraine. There's been very little pressure on Russia, and it leaves open the question as to what Vladimir Putin is actually willing to do. He actually doesn't probably believe in his own mind that he needs this ceasefire or that he needs to negotiate a settlement. Certainly not on terms that are useful to Ukraine.
So when Ukraine says that Russia is just playing games, and to illustrate that, the Ukrainian president points to the massive drone strikes that were carried out overnight. Do you think all of this discussion and this dialogue oriented towards achieving peace is merely cosmetic?
Well, I mean, I do think that, if there is a ceasefire agreement, the parties will try to respect it. But we are a long way from ending the conflict itself. We have a lot of very difficult issues, to tackle. And the dynamic so far would suggest that it's going to be very difficult for the Trump administration to get both sides on the same page.
We're hearing from the Ukrainian capital officials there saying that relations with Washington are, quote, back on track. Judging from the dialogue that we've been given, party to in Riyadh, what we've managed to hear and understand from what's been discussed there, I mean, are you getting that impression as well that, fences have indeed now been properly mended?
Well, I think there's been an attempt on the Ukrainian side, to try to repair the damage of the Zelensky-Trump meeting, in the White House. But the broader reality is clear. Donald Trump values his relationship with Vladimir Putin far more than he values his relationship with Vladimir Zelensky. And so it remains to be seen, to what degree the Trump administration will be, in fact, an honest broker when it comes to trying to achieve a long-term settlement.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in Ukraine must be pretty confused because they've gone from having an ally in the form of the United States that supported them almost unconditionally. Now they have an administration in Washington that says President Zelensky is corrupt. They say that elections should be held, suggesting that he's not the legitimate president. They're then saying he's disrespectful, he's ungrateful. I mean, a massive change of tack, very difficult for an ally to understand. And I'm just wondering whether this shows to the world and to America's other allies that it's perhaps not as reliable as it might be.
Well, certainly, as we saw in the White House meeting, the president took out his hammer and said to Zelensky, before the media in the room that he has no cards to play. It's long overdue for Donald Trump to take out the hammer and give Vladimir Putin the same kind of treatment. So in a normal negotiation where Putin is just asking for one more thing, the president should express public and private exasperation and really lean hard on Putin to actually respect the agreement that's been negotiated. That's what we need to see. I'm not sure that's what we will ultimately see.
Do you think President Trump would afford President Putin the same sort of treatment as he gave President Zelensky, and perhaps humiliate him in front of the world press and shoo him out the door? Is that the sort of thing we might perhaps see next time President Putin goes to the White House?
Given the interactions between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin over the years, I think that's highly unlikely.
Why wouldn't President Trump treat President Zelensky in exactly the same way?
Go back to Helsinki during the first term, where the president all but discounted that there was Russian interference in the 2016 election. Putin assured him that he had nothing to do with this, and he was willing to accept those assurances as opposed to the analysis of his intelligence community. This ship sailed a long time ago. It's unlikely that Donald Trump, who desperately wants a productive relationship with Vladimir Putin, is going to lean as hard as he needs to lean to get Russia to actually do something hard, something difficult.
Okay, so since that disastrous meeting in the Oval Office, the Ukrainians have, come back cap in hand. They've pretty much done everything that was asked of them. They agreed to the 30-day ceasefire deal that the Russians ultimately rejected. But do you think the Ukrainians are doing everything they should? Are you seeing them do everything that's possible for them to do in order to obtain maximum support from the Trump administration?
Well, Zelensky does have the weak hand, and he's trying to maintain the relationship between the United States and Ukraine. He really has no choice. So I do think that Zelensky is cautiously trying to do what he can to bring Trump back on his side. But again, if as we get into the bare knuckles aspect of this, Trump has to be as hard on the Russian side as he has been on the Ukrainian side. I think Vladimir Zelensky it's fair for him to be skeptical that Trump is going to be, the even-handed negotiator that will ultimately protect not only America's national interest, but Ukraine's national interest as well.
Just to sort of wrap things up, I mean, are we looking at a scenario in which we are closer to peace now as a result of this recent dialogue between those three parties than we were, say, a week ago?
I think it's useful to get these partial agreements. I think we have a long road, to get to something that is, stable and durable, and actually solves the problem that we face in Ukraine.
And with Ukraine obviously being perhaps the most important issue under discussion between the Russians and the Americans, but not the only thing. I mean, are there any other achievements that you would give due credit to the Trump administration for having extracted from these talks between them and the Russians?
Well, look, this is a multi-sided process, and even if we can congratulate Trump and Zelensky for getting a negotiating process started, we can and should be critical that at the same time, the Trump administration is destroying the transatlantic relationship, not only by keeping Europe on the sidelines of this negotiation, but now we see in the other big story, of the disdain that the Trump administration has for its European allies, that ultimately, even if you negotiate an agreement on paper, who's going to enforce it? The Trump administration is going to have to rely on European countries, to carry the heavy lifting here. And if you're undermining that relationship, you have to question exactly what will be achieved, even if there's an agreement on paper.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Always a pleasure. PJ Crowley, thank you very much indeed for your time, sir.
You're welcome, Tom.
Now, the US President Donald Trump on Monday reiterated his suggestion that the United States should take over Greenland. Well, that's a proposal that's been flatly rejected by Denmark's Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen. Well, she called the suggestion unacceptable pressure on the semi-autonomous Danish territory, particularly coming ahead of an unsolicited visit from a high-profile US delegation, which includes the US Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife, Usha Vance.
And repeat after me.
The visits by Americans can be viewed independently from the statements and reports we've heard from the American side, clearly starting from January and continuing to present day. It is now evident that this visit is not in favor of Greenland, and therefore I must say that the pressure being placed on both Greenland and Denmark in this case is unacceptable.
Well, while Danish politicians were suspicious about the visit, the US Vice President J.D. Vance justified the trip, which he's going to be making alongside his wife, Usha.
Hey guys, it's J.D. Vance, the Vice President, and there was so much excitement around Usha's visit to Greenland this Friday that I decided that I didn't want her to have all that fun by herself, and so I'm going to join her. I'm going to visit some of our guardians in the Space Force on the northwest coast of Greenland and also just check out what's going on with the security there of Greenland. As you know, it's really important. A lot of other countries have threatened Greenland, have threatened to use its territories and its waterways to threaten the United States, to threaten Canada, and of course to threaten the people of Greenland. So we're going to check out how things are going there. And I say that speaking for President Trump, we want to reinvigorate the security of the people of Greenland because we think it's important to protecting the security of the entire world. Unfortunately, leaders in both America and in Denmark, I think, ignored Greenland for far too long.
The US Vice President J.D. Vance speaking there. Well, his wife had been scheduled to watch a popular dog sled race there in Greenland, but that's been cancelled and she will instead only visit the US space base at Pituffik. Well, Denmark's Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen has welcomed this US decision to alter the itinerary of the planned visit. He too believes that, quote, unacceptable pressure is being exerted on his country. Well, for more, we're joined now by Carla, the former US ambassador to Denmark, Greenland and the Faroe Islands during the first Trump administration. Great to have you with us once again, Ambassador Sands. Just want to start by asking you about this rethink of this US delegation visit to Greenland. Why do you think there's been a change of plan?
Well, clearly because Denmark is trying to gaslight these poor Greenlanders. I think they're giving Greenlanders Stockholm syndrome, where they're getting them to identify with their oppressors. And it's an old, sad story. Usha Vance was going as a senior diplomat from the US, the vice president's beautiful, young, accomplished wife, to go and join the Greenlanders at their biggest event of the year, their big dog sled competition. And that was, for the Greenlanders, a diplomatic coup. Every country wants to have visits from high-level American diplomats, especially from the administration. So what Denmark is trying to do is create tension between the US and Greenland, and right now they're achieving it. But remember, Denmark, their vested interest is to hold Greenland in their control, although they have never developed it and can't afford to, and are not able to defend it. So there's a huge loss here for Greenland, and shame on Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen.
But there is a bit of a break with protocol and diplomatic norms, isn't there here, Ambassador? I mean, ordinarily, such a high-profile visit involving someone like the US Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife would come with an official invitation, and this one did not.
Oh, no. When American high-level government officials want to visit a country, the U.S. embassy, and in this case, the consulate, would spin up to support it. They would let the government know. The governments are always thrilled to have U.S. people, high-level visitors go, because what it does is it strengthens the relationship, and it often brings with it benefits. For instance, increased trade, increased security cooperation. There are always goodies that come with visits. That's just how it works diplomatically. And so it's a great loss at this moment, but I would say this is a tiny bump in the road. The Greenlanders haven't even heard the first offer from President Trump in increasing the relationship. Denmark's going to lose in this. Is it today or is it 2 or 3 or 5 years from now? I don't know. But Greenland's going independent in spite of what Denmark is doing, trying to lash them to them in a losing proposition for the Greenlanders.
So you're saying that basically Greenland has to choose, that it's got to be under the umbrella. As you say, there's only, 57,000 people that live in Greenland. Without the sort of the security umbrella, whether it's provided by Denmark and the rest of Europe or the United States, Greenland cannot be entirely independent. Is that what you're saying?
Well, Greenland can't be entirely independent because they have no defense. They have zero defense, and they're not able to support themselves. They get about $600 million a year from Denmark in welfare transfer. So since Greenland cannot be independent, it needs, I will say, an association with another country. Denmark is not able to develop Greenland and to give Greenland what it wants, which is financial prosperity. It just gives them welfare, which keeps them on the dole, kind of like a poor person that never achieves their potential because they take a little allowance. But they also, Denmark cannot afford, it's not capable of defending Greenland, nor, I will share, is Europe capable of defending Greenland. Europe is not even capable of defending Europe without the United States. They don't have a capable military in spite of NATO. I mean, it's a great alliance, but Europe has a long way to go to actually be capable of being in a conflict without the United States support.
So do you think, when we're talking about support and the security of Greenland, do you think that the main threat here, I mean, we haven't mentioned them by name, but we might as well, is it Russia and China that would otherwise want to get their hands on Greenland if it's not the United States?
Yes, Tom, that's correct. For instance, in the past, China tried to bring Greenland into their Belt and Road Initiative back in 2017. Now, the allies were able to turn that off. But as a matter of fact, Greenlanders have told me money has no color. They just want development. They just want prosperity. They want success in their tourism. They want to be successful in their mining. They want their people to benefit financially from this. They haven't to date. Now, when I was the U.S. ambassador, I was able to put a consulate in Greenland. I was able to get trade and cooperation agreements with both with Greenland and the Faroe Islands. And what that did is it helped us give funds, for instance, from the State Department to help them with their mining, help support their tourism development. But there's still a long way to go. American companies will go in and invest in Greenland with the backing of the U.S. government. We have tools, things like XM Bank, Development Finance Corporation. We need those to help companies risk in places like Greenland. But the fact is, Greenland needs to be defended, number one, and it's not secure. Russian subs, Russian ships, cutting those undersea cables, China ships. There's a lot of Chinese activity in coordination with the Russians now in the region, and this is all open source. You can go and you can look up and read about it on your own. China has true domination plans for both poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic. So we have to pay attention to both poles. But in my case, where I worked was in the Arctic and subarctic region, and there's the seas around Greenland. So it's not just the body of land, it's the giant GI-UK gap, and that means Greenland, Iceland, and the UK.
So why doesn't Greenland fall under well, I think it does. So, I mean, Greenland does fall under the NATO security umbrella because it's, as things stand, it's part of Denmark. It's an autonomous region. It's protected by NATO. So why the need to protect Greenland from those other powers by the United States when, in fact, it's already protected by the United States and all the other NATO members, isn't it?
No, it's actually Denmark's responsibility. So NATO has these articles, and Article 3 in the NATO Charter is that every member nation has the ability to defend their own territory. That's Article 3. Denmark does not have that ability to defend their own territory. So they're already breaking Article 3. Article 5 is that the NATO allies come to the defense of their other allied nations when they're attacked. But NATO doesn't have the capability to actually be there and be elsewhere where we have real issues like the South China Sea, for instance, or other areas where there is active aggression by, for instance, China. NATO is a wonderful alliance, but the European allies still, like I said earlier, have a long way to go. They're not bringing in enough young military men. They're not training them. They're not training enough military men, young-aged men. There's a lot of older military members in a lot of these NATO military, whether it's the Navy or the Army in those countries, Air Force. We need young fighters, and then they need the equipment, and they need to refresh the equipment. And there's a lot of old, broken down tanks and equipment sitting in many NATO allied, store yards where they need to be refreshing that equipment, and they're not doing it.
You were ambassador to Copenhagen, which of course covers, that ambassadorship included Greenland and the Faroe Islands. You were there from the years 2017 to 2021. And during that time, during the first Trump administration, he did tout this idea of a Greenland takeover or buying Greenland. Internationally, there were, quite a lot of headlines mocking that idea. But what did people say to you in Denmark behind closed doors about that?
Well, so President Trump was the third U.S. president to make this proposal that we would buy Greenland. And it's going to look different than buying. There's many ways to associate Greenland. For instance, a COFA, like a free association agreement, like Micronesia or Palau. There are other ways that we can have Greenland come under our security umbrella and still be a completely independent country. And I don't speak for the Trump administration. I just speak from my own personal experience as ambassador. And the Danes are very threatened by the idea of the United States bringing Greenland closer into their security umbrella. The most important thing is that this area is secured and doesn't fall into enemy hands. And that's really the threat. And when Mette Frederiksen, the Prime Minister of Denmark, speaks the way she does, it's very dangerous talk because what she's doing, she's making Greenland more vulnerable. The Greenlanders want security and they want prosperity, and they don't really care who's going to do it. And so we want to become closer with Greenland, and we want to be their partner of choice. That is so important for the security of the world. We do not want Greenland to fall into Chinese hands. And how easy would it be? Very easy. And that's why President Trump is moving as quickly as he is. And Mette Frederiksen, if she was smart, she would pick up the phone and she would call President Trump and she would work out a deal today.
Yeah, but what about the Greenlanders? You say they don't really care, but they obviously do, because a new opinion poll, the latest opinion poll I saw said 85% of Greenlanders specifically, 85% of 57,000 people do not want to be part of America. So why should they be?
Well, so they can stay Greenlanders and have all of the Greenlandic law and Greenlandic independence that they want in an association with the United States. The fact is, they're very upset with Denmark, but Denmark, by doing this gaslighting and creating this Stockholm syndrome among the Greenlanders, Denmark in this case is not to be trusted. So Denmark, their university, paid for that poll, and that poll was skewed so that they would get the election outcome that they wanted. They want Greenland not to go independent. I promise you, Greenland is going independent. So since that is what Greenlanders want, we want to make sure that when Greenland goes independent, that they are in the Western circle and not in the arms of China. We want to make sure that they are part of the orbit of the West. That's why President Trump says having Greenland in the U.S. security net is important for the U.S. security, but it's also important for world security. If there's a conflict anywhere and the U.S. needs to get to Europe, Greenland is on the way. And so we need to make sure that Greenland, with its great people, they're wonderful people, they have a wonderful culture that's similar to the American state of Alaska. They have the opportunity to become very wealthy. Our U.S. state of Alaska has a sovereign wealth fund that's been built over generations. Their mining proceeds go into that sovereign wealth fund, and every Alaskan benefits from checks from that sovereign wealth fund. Well, that's what we were hoping to build with Greenlanders, and it's still possible. I think good things will happen between the U.S. and Greenland, but Denmark is going to try to muck up the works and ruin the relationship.
Okay. Well, I mean, President Trump is, however, refusing to rule out the use of force to bring Greenland into the U.S. orbit, whatever the future arrangement looks like. I mean, what kind of a message does that send out to the rest of the world about, territorial expansion? And doesn't that just give carte blanche to other world leaders to help themselves to bits of the globe that they have the military upper hand over?
Well, it's an interesting question. It's provocative. However, anyone that knows President Trump knows that he's the peace president. He doesn't want war, but he's also the author of a book called The Art of the Deal. He wrote this book decades ago, and I'm sure he would never take anything off the table before a deal is negotiated. That's the best place to start, right? You don't start by negotiating against yourself. But President Trump is actually the first president in, I think, 80 years that did not start a new foreign war. He is the peace president.
Okay, well, let's hope he isn't about to start one there in Greenland. Thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there. Former U.S. Ambassador Carla Sands, thank you for your time.
Thanks. Great to talk to you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.